good day, everybody. I am Florence Lasbennes. I'm the Managing Director of 4SD, and in this new series of our online open briefings, I will open them and facilitate the conversation a bit later. So David told you at the last session, for those of you who joined it, that our intention with 4SD Foundation was to propose those open online briefings as monthly meetings, as an evolution from the COVID online briefings that you know very well, that where we were sharing updates on the pandemic over 118 sessions from March 2020 to December 2022. That was based on the analysis and guidance provided by the World Health Organization and David's role as Special Envoy to WHO Director General. In this new series, as David already told you last time, we want to look at what's happening in the world on COVID pandemic, but also on all the other challenges that humanity is facing at the moment. And we want to, with you, put a living systems lens on what's happening in the world, which is how we at the 4SD Foundation try to navigate complex issues. So this one is the second briefing of this new series, and we welcome your comments and suggestions to help us evolving. In this briefing, which will be held once a month, we will offer participants an interdisciplinary and people-focused perspective on those challenges of the world. The format in a minute, and that leaves time for more colleagues to connect. I'll pass the floor to David, and of course, David will give us his briefing and his overview of what he's seeing around the world. Once David has finished his briefing, I will take back the floor to give you the floor. Those of you who want to comment, add your vignettes, taints on what's happening from where you sit, and I will invite John Atkinson in particular to reflect on what it means for living systems leadership. Welcome, welcome, welcome. You are at the 4SD Open Online Briefings. I'm just opening. I'm Florence Lasbennes, the Managing Director of 4SD, and I'm about to give the floor to David, while at the same time flagging David, I've spotted Iman Ahmed being connected. David, to give you his overview. Welcome, Iman. Very lovely to see you here today. I'm sure David will give you the floor very quickly. Let's go to David.
Thank you very much indeed. First of all, we have a wonderful collection of people here already. This is great, and it is giving me a huge amount of inspiration. Now, I'm going to focus on the following issues. First, I can't help but continue to reflect on COVID-19, what it's teaching us, the threats still are. But I'm also going to look at another potential quite nasty infectious disease, that is influenza H5N1, currently causing nasty bird flu around the world, and in fact it's been doing it for some years, but provoking anxieties that this could become another pandemic. I'm going to spend a bit of time on the cost of living crisis. I will bring you up to date with the analyses that we've been doing and the anxieties that the United Nations in particular has about where this is going during 2023 and into 24. I'm going to focus also with some of you on the consequences of the earthquake that has taken place a few days ago in affecting northern Syria and southern Turkey. Now, one of us who's been with us regularly has actually been working in Gaziantep. And those of you who've been reading about it, or indeed those of you who've been and worked in southern Turkey, may be knowing Gaziantep And we're going to hear from this person who's been working as a medical officer with the World Health Organization in Gaziantep during this session. And I may ask that she come in early. She knows who she is. So I hope you're ready. I can see you. Just want to say that to help the discussion, which we always find to be really good, those of you who've got on your computer something saying iPad, and one of you does, and I think I know who it is. I could actually say who it is. Yeah, you're nodding. Could you put the correct name on so that it's easy for Florence and me to bring you in? And I want to stress that this effort of trying to identify how living systems leadership can help in different circumstances is really at the center of our practice in 4SD. And we want to make certain that these sessions prove to be useful for learning and sharing. They move quickly on to COVID-19. Want to stress that towards the end of any infectious disease outbreak, in this case, a multi-centered infectious disease outbreak called a pandemic, you really do have to know where the virus is and what it's doing. You have to be able to then be active in places where there are cases emerging, breaking transmission if you can, and identifying emerging variants of the infectious agent. And we had a big scare that I discussed with you last time we met over what COVID is doing in China. And right now, we do not have evidence of the emergence of a new variant of concern that is likely to lead to much greater suffering, but it's there in our minds. So the challenges on COVID are continuing to keep an eye open for new variants and being active in the face of those new variants, continuing to highlight the challenges of long COVID in its various forms. It's a syndrome with multiple antecedents, and we've discussed, and I believe helped to highlight long COVID in these sessions, and continuing, perhaps most importantly, to focus on the equity dimension of COVID and how, in order to deal with these equity dimensions, it's really important to have integrated action at the local level that builds on and seeks to connect together existing systems for public health and for economic development and well-being. Now, new variants, well, as I say, that's really the big worry zone. Long COVID, no total answers as to what's going on, but some of you will remember Ray Duncan being on previous versions of these briefings, and Ray said, look, she's absolutely convinced that the capacity of people to form microclots when they've had COVID infection is super important in explaining at least some of the factors, and that's so important, especially as it's 1 in 20 who seem to get long COVID. And then the equity effects and the need for local responses. I just want to stress that in our view, that's 4SDs and the World Health Organization, now is not the time to be dismantling precious and carefully established COVID infrastructure, particularly for tracking what's happening with the virus and so on. Got to keep it going. The bizarre thing, everybody, and we heard this from Maria van Kerkhove, who often joins us in these panel sessions, is that the bizarre thing is that the disinformation about COVID and the politicization of COVID as an issue with really aggressive positions against people who are working for COVID is constantly challenging for people in public health. I think it's actually causing public health professionals to think twice about offering advice on what's to do and to, in some ways, perhaps hasten the removal of things like mask mandates and vaccine mandates because of fear of political repercussions if you hold out for them. So the need to continue to try to disentangle what is proper public health advice from disinformation that in some cases is quite malicious. This is becoming greater and greater. And I know many of you have offered guidance on how to avoid it. The way I will do it is something that I worked on with Mahika Acharya, who's here, which is a form of communication that is as authentic as I can make it. I want to be known for being honest. I want to be known for being humble, at least with regard to the virus, because I don't know what it's going to do in coming weeks and months. I want to be known for adopting a humane approach to the virus and its challenges. I want to be known for being holistic and putting the whole person at the center. There are a number of H's there that I think are key for authentic action, and I believe that has to be at the center of the communication that we do in order to be able to deal properly as a society with this virus. And you know, just finally, I really want to be sure that all of us everywhere are doing our best to analyze how the work went during COVID, and just to look out, because the people who are trying to disinform, who are trying to accuse those of us working in public health of genocide and things worse than that, actually will get stronger and louder if we don't stand up for ourselves. And so one of the things I want to do is to look at the 118 open online briefings that we've done and try to gauge the extent to which the advice that was given during these briefings and the discussions that we had in these briefings actually contributed to better public health action in relation to the virus. I mean, the important thing is just seeing, were our predictions subsequently turning out to be correct? And then we can start looking at whether or not the information on which we based our predictions was right, and whether the particular assumptions and projections that we made were sensible in public health terms. So we are going to analyze these 118 online briefings and just try to see whether or not we were actually in line, mostly because I just want to be properly equipped to be able to deal with those who are questioning the value of systems-based, living systems-based public health in dealing with crises. Let's move to H5N1 bird flu. This has been a threat that's been around for a long time. It was the existence of bird flu that led to the leaders of ASEAN nations in 2005 to come together and say to Kofi Annan, who was then Secretary General of the United Nations, that they'd seen what SARS had done, particularly in Southeast Asia, and they wanted to be sure that if H5N1 bird flu, which causes really widespread death in birds, in most birds, except for ducks, where it's unfortunately carried by the ducks, that they wanted to see whether H5N1 bird flu was likely to jump across from animals into humans and cause a human influenza pandemic. And I was in discussion last week in Bangkok at a thing called the Prince Mahidol Award Conference with a series of expert virologists who know about H5N1. And their language is quite stark. They say it's 3 mutations away from being able to cause disease in humans. So we have to keep an eye on it. But at the same time, this particular highly pathogenic influenza strain H5N1 has actually been spreading amongst poultry and wild birds for 25 years. So people were thinking, well, we're probably okay, but it's recently been jumping species. It's in mink, it's in otters, it's in sea lions, and that is the sort of thing that the virologists look at with some concern, because they say if it's starting to jump species from birds to mammals, then it really is something to worry about. That makes it more likely to jump to humans. So that's why Tedros, the Director General of WHO, is saying, look, if you come across dead animals and birds around the place, anywhere where you know there's a fair amount of highly pathogenic avian influenza, don't touch them. Don't bury them in a sort of nice way, which we all want to do. You actually got to leave them alone. And handling dead animals that have got these kind of viruses, it's difficult just putting on a pair of gloves and so on. It's really hard to stop yourself touching. And so I'm quite keen to encourage everybody to follow Tedros's advice. Now, of course, we've learned a bit from COVID. The pandemic treaty that's being negotiated right now is designed to make certain that preparedness for pandemics, including the capacity to fast track on vaccines, to fast track on therapies, and to get proper preventive advice into place and disseminated around the world. The pandemic treaty is highly relevant for this. Chris, you asked about it. I want to say that it is important, however, that we recognize that the fundamental problem with COVID was, as well as preparedness being a bit messy, was actually an unwillingness of people to cooperate across political parties within countries, cooperate between countries, and cooperate between the rich world and the poor world when it came to vaccine distribution at the beginning of 2021, when on these briefings I was getting pretty upset about the inequities. So a pandemic treaty is great, but it's really only going to be as effective as the political context within which it is implemented. And I just hope that those who are negotiating this treaty do not assume that a treaty will substitute from ongoing work to try to deal with the political differences between nations and indeed within nations, and the way in which these political differences undermine working together for the common good. I'm glad that WHO has really fast-tracked work on H5N1 and is working with manufacturers to make sure that if needed, there will be plenty of vaccines. On the cost of living crisis and the work that we're doing on that, it's really quite interesting that actually some of the market prices on the global market of key things like food commodities like maize or vegetable oil or rice, as well as energy, they really have started to come down. The big peaks of price rises, particularly on energy, and especially in Europe, occurred during last year. They've come down. They've not come down to where they were before the Ukraine war, but they are coming down. And indeed, an awful lot of food prices are coming down, except for vegetable oil, which is still a bit high. And so what this does is it leads us to believe that there is some degree of stabilization on world markets, but it's not universal. And the real problem is that, well, as we see on so many issues, prices come down on the world market, but the transmission of price reduction through to local markets, particularly in poor countries, where there's perhaps not much competition between consumers, then the prices tend to stay up. And they're what we call sticky. And so we've got sticky raised prices for food and for other essential items in many low-income countries. And they're often post-crisis countries like Lebanon and so on, because in general, we find that sticky raised prices much more likely in situations where governance is not strong and where there's recently been a war. So all this is being tracked in the Global Crisis Response Group. We're about to produce our first report of 2023. Actually, writing the thing is proving to be quite difficult because getting live real-time data on what's happening, particularly in some of the poorer countries, is difficult. But in summary, prices still high. Devaluation of local currencies means the purchasing power of people's money is reduced. Import costs of key items like food, but also like fertilizer, have gone up. And because fertilizer is linked to energy, there's been some real instability in the fertilizer market, coupled with the fact that a lot of potash comes from Belarus and from Russia, and there's been real disturbances in trade. So fertilizer is really particularly troublesome. And then what the overall consequences in this is that there's been a slide into greater poverty for tens of millions of households all over the world, but particularly poorer households are getting poorer. Wealthier households are not getting much poorer because by and large, if you've got wealth, you can buy your way out of the difficulties associated with this cost of living crisis. And so poorer households getting poorer in tens of thousands of numbers in the tens of thousands, and in many low-income countries, this is leading to big increases in poverty, and that is associated with coping strategies that increase the risk of malnutrition, particularly among women, among children, and among older people. And that is happening. There is increased malnutrition happening all over the world, both increases in obesity, interestingly, and increases in undernutrition. If you look at the overall situation, this is very pronounced in low and middle-income countries, and the number of countries that are what we call hotspots for food insecurity has increased to over 20. We still have 6 countries in which there is what is perceived to be a famine-like conditions. Many of the countries that are in difficulty are also in challenge when it comes to debt repayments, and they've got shortages of hard currency in their bank accounts. And so the current view is that the crisis conditions that we have at the moment, particularly affecting poor people in poor countries, to a degree affecting poor people in rich countries, are likely to persist well into 2023. And if the fertilizer challenge continues, even into 2024. So the cost of living crisis is not going quite quickly. And remember, it's global. I know if you're in Britain or in France, you read a lot about what's happening to people who are income poor in your own country. But remember that actually in low-income countries or poorer people in middle-income countries, it's an awful lot worse. And with the cutbacks in development assistance, plus all the money that's being spent out of development assistance budgets on Ukraine, plus, of course, the costs of the new crisis, this needs immediate attention. And that's why I'd like to move to the reality of what has happened in northern Syria and southern Turkey. While the media will be full of stories of numbers of people dead, numbers of people missing, there will be quite a lot of quotes of anger and frustration of people in different parts of the affected area, and so on. And then it'll be out of the news. But actually the hard work of relief following earthquakes, in my experience, having been directly involved in earthquakes in Iran and Turkey before, and indirectly in Nepal, my experience is that it's the 3, 6, 9, 12 months after the earthquake when real leadership is needed, because it always takes that sort of time to rebuild, and that's to start the rebuilding process. It's taken much longer in the case of a very bad earthquake that hit Port-au-Prince in Haiti some years ago, but on average, it's 1 to 2 years. And so there's an awful lot of work to do after you've had the initial sadness and misery to actually help societies restart. And it's particularly challenging in northern Syria because the earthquake has affected communities that are under different administrations. And also it's not easy in southern Turkey because of quite a lot of fierce independence of different groups in that area. So this is going to be a political challenge. It's also going to be a humanitarian challenge to try to organize the relief. For these kinds of absolutely massive disasters, usually one goes in search of an awful lot of helicopters. Now, helicopters are not easy to get at the moment because a lot of them are involved in the war in Ukraine, and defense budgets anyway are very tight and helicopters are expensive. So I imagine that there will be a lot of thinking about what kind of coalition to pull together to support both the people of Turkey and the people of Syria through this. Then how will different organizations like the United Nations, like the World Health Organization contribute? And the WHO Director General is due to be in the region pretty soon. I don't quite know where he's going. So what does it mean for leadership? Answer: to have centralized command and control, which we usually aim for in disasters, may not be the optimal way to go here, because what you need is to empower and encourage local groups to be active, helping them to locate cash, fuel, and other essentials, helping them to have access to power, electricity, but enabling them to make decisions at the local level, which will lead to as many people as possible surviving without getting very upset with each other. And I would really like to underscore Imam's point that one, there are aftershocks. This is happening a very serious and super worrying. Two, that people don't want to be inside buildings if they can help it. Three, that they need their basic services like food, like water, and the rest. And four, that those who can get out will get out, but that can be a real problem because they block the roads. So quite a lot of management of transport is absolutely essential, but it's best done through a networked approach, reaching all different people in authority. It's just super difficult when you're trying to do that across political lines, which is why the UN system is going to be so important and why it's so wonderful that Dr. Iman is there. So just some reactions. There may be others who've been involved. I think there's one person on who might have been in Istanbul. I don't know, but otherwise, Flo, back to you for the rest of the moderated discussion.
Thank you, David. Iman, I've seen you receive a lot of hearts and prayers from everybody on this call. Some are putting words in the chat. Keep going, colleagues. Any others who were in Turkey, as David was saying, would like to comment on this situation? Or any other comments on what has happened to you in the last months?
Hello, everybody.
Please.
Serkan is speaking.
Serkan, please do come. Tell us who you are speaking from, and please go ahead.
Thank you. Actually, Dr. Iman Ahmet, we are. Thank you. You are there, and you have been lived what our other friends, other people who are living there, and you have been expressed what you have been lived. And actually, although I was not there, I have been lived the same moments like you, because years ago, 1999, when I was in Istanbul, we had another big earthquake happened. The value was, I guess, 7.4 at that time. It was in Gölcük centered, but Istanbul and many regions also affected. And it was the first biggest earthquake in my life actually experienced. I thought we have been learned from such a big earthquake at that time. Many things. It's not easy to express with the things, because originally even I was not living in Istanbul, but I was just graduated from university and completed my military service and just went to there for some business interviews the next day. So the night these things happened, and I actually lived the similar things when Iman was explaining what she was experienced there. Those are not easy, not easy. Being in the center and being looking from far, those are of course different. Living in there is challenging, and also being far from there, like we had experienced this week, and cannot do anything, although you want to do it, but cannot do anything, especially in the first day, first moments, first days, because you're hearing something happened and you cannot do anything. And later, quickly, people start to be organized for the first aid, for the teams who have been experienced for such things. And we have to accept that it's a very long thing that we can discuss very long, but it's a very unique earthquake, not happened for hundreds of years in the world, because there are two main big lanes, big critical lanes in Anatolia, and some specialists says the land over there, who almost 13 million people are living, moved 3 meters from northeast to southwest. It's a big earthquake, and two earthquakes followed each other. So we are so sad. What we are doing, we are trying to do our best for those people. However, we can support companies, civilian societies, universities, government, soldier, everybody, our friends who are coming from Europe, from other countries. They are all trying to help to recover and save as much as more people. And we have a lot of miracles we have been read, we have been followed from the social media. After 80 hours, some still people we can avoid. So those are the things that I can tell you. And I hope we will recover soon.
We all hope. Serkan, thank you for being here today, for sharing this testimony. I think we are all humbled, but want to share our hearts and prayers with both of you, and of course all your beloved ones around you.
Thank you.
Please do come back at other occasion of our briefings. We would love to discuss with you as things will recover and evolve in coming weeks and months. David, John,
thank you.
Those comments. Thank you, Serkan.
Thank you.
Any reaction? John, maybe, before we hear David, and more people will want to take the floor. John first. Oh, let's look at Chris Shipton. It might be easier to put drawings rather than words on what we hear today. Thank you, Chris, for being here. As in previous seasons of the Open Online Briefings. John, you were ready to react. Please do come in.
Yeah, and not easy to. It's hard. It's not easy to listen to the testimony of people who are there, and for those who've been in similar environments, the thing that sticks is just the chaotic mess. Just how hard it is to get even very basic things done. And Chris, your picture said command and control may not be enough. Well, our response to most emergencies is, we need to direct stuff as quick as we can to places that need it. The people who have things that we need, like information, like medical supply, like food, like earth-moving equipment, like those great big jacks that lift things up, all of that sort of stuff we just need. And so we respond to people who've got that and say that they've got it and know how to use it, and we want all of that. But as others were saying, over time, that control, it doesn't work. It doesn't work often in the immediate because it's just so messy trying to get stuff through. Nobody really knows what's going on. And in that environment, stories start to circulate, myths start to build, narratives begin to arise. And in an environment of emotion, of fear, of anger, of anxiety, of hope, all sorts of things start to bubble up. And so if we're to shift to the network response that David described as being so important, and this was the same conversation we had at the early days of COVID, it's the same sort of immediate response moving into, and we need to build things that deal with the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year. If we're to do that, we've got to fill that space as leaders with a description of what's happening, with information that says, this is what we know, this is what we don't know. If I remember, David, your Your COVID briefings were very clear on where we didn't know stuff and you couldn't comment. We didn't make up things to fill the gap. We didn't try to give people a hopeful answer if it didn't exist. That enables people to make sense of what's going on. But through that messaging, often a set of values. What is it that binds us together? What is it that holds us? What do we care about? That if we can hold that together, we start to build the networked responses, the collective action in small pockets that start to link with other pockets that start to make things work. So when we do that, we move from control into liberation. We allow space for people's ingenuity and their responsibility and their generosity to take hold and to start to fill a space. And that for me is perhaps the key thing we can do as leaders. How do we fill this void of information, of sense making, of values with things that matter, that people latch onto, that enables them to organize as they wish, with the support that can be provided to them in order that the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months and longer has its movement in the right direction. That's all from me.
Very interesting. Thank you very much, John. You might not have seen Iman was showing a thumb up. I think your manner of reflecting on the type of leadership required in the situation she's facing was resonating with her. Here she is again. Thank you. Thank you, John and Iman. David, you want to comment further also?
Just to wanting everybody to hold on to what Iman has said, and to just recognize that in those hours that she described, particularly with others driving gently around, trying to find water, trying to find toilets, trying to find places to wash, trying to find places where you're unlikely to get crushed when an aftershock comes along. I know that so well. The place to go in earthquakes, under a table or under a door frame first, and then ideally outside, if you can get outside in places where rubble from buildings will not fall on you and injure you. So very, very interesting and important. What I'm sure Iman can't tell us, and I'm not asking her to, is how the challenges of getting across the border into northern Syria are going. It's not an easy frontier to work on, in my experience. So thank you. If others don't want to talk, and I can continue with how I perceive that some of what John and Iman referred to is super relevant for how the world responds to the broader challenges of the cost of living crisis. But that's just something, Florence, to hold in reserve. Thank you.
Well, let's open. Anybody I've seen in the chat, there's an interesting conversation also on women being especially impacted by all crises. And I can imagine that on the place impacted by the earthquake, their situation might not be enviable. But those of you, I think the conversation was triggered by Annie Feltham. Do you want to comment on this discussion in the chat? Welcome to you.
Thanks, Florence. It was just something I'd been thinking about this week, completely out of the blue, sort of joining up the dots and seeing how globally badly women are currently doing. And it's in poor countries and in rich countries. And there seemed to be a flow just in the same direction, which I found quite shocking if we think of the advances we thought we'd made in the last quarter of the 20th century, just how fragile they are, whether they're built on religious or economic or political grounds. It was the extent, and I gave a few examples. I mean, the violence against women and girls is just awful. I mean, other places, particularly in Afghanistan and also Iran, the power balance has become completely distorted. And then, as I was thinking about it over the week, I was looking for something positive going in the opposite direction. I couldn't find any, and so that's why I thought I'd roll it into the group, because I think the systems approach, living systems, does have a lot to offer But as you all know, it's not straightforward, and so I couldn't see any easy remedy. So there's my bit of gloom for the week.
Thank you, Annie, putting the spotlight on women's situation and how living systems approaches, living systems leadership can contribute to securing what is advanced for women in certain countries, how we can use this approach to keep on advancing on the rights and agencies of women. Anybody who want to pick up on this topic, please do raise your hand. Otherwise, I think Karen Palmer also wanted to share something with the group, and I have Nigel Lloyd also.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. A couple of weeks at the, not last briefing, but the one before, I mentioned a report that I was hoping to finish, and I finally have finished it, and it has finally been vetted and vetted and vetted. And so it will be published next week online. The report is called How Language Shapes Change, Perspectives on the Most and Least Effective Communication Strategies and Tactics During the COVID-19 Pandemic. And you know what, David, you said about reflecting on the forest debriefings and learning from them. You know, if I had to summarize the whole report, I mean, it's quite long, but if I had to summarize it, I would say that what we got wrong was where we lacked transparency and authenticity, and where we didn't deal with uncertainty, where we failed to communicate uncertainty, enabled misinformation and disinformation. You know, my discussion conclusions, just a couple sentences, I say, in hindsight, some mistakes are glaringly obvious. Others take careful and honest reflection before we see the light. And I think that's what, you know, you're starting to do with the forest debriefings and in other ways. You know, effective public health communications is more about meaning making than it is about mere information transmission. And in this way, language shapes change. So I have sent, David, you have the only draft in the world in your inbox outside of Canada, outside of CanCOVID and outside of the Health Canada, which you may share with your colleagues if you like, but it just can't be publicly distributed until it goes live next week on the CanCOVID website. But if you'd like a copy, I can put my email in the chat and you can email me and I can send a copy to you. But I do think this reflection on how we communicate, the language we use, and how we make meaning rather than merely information transmission is really important. Thanks for the moment.
Thank you very much, and congratulations that the book is eventually about to come out. Here at ForestD, we will all pick the draft that is in David's mailbox, because that resonates very strongly with elements that we are discussing very often. Language and communication matters indeed. Thank you, Karen. I'm not going immediately to John and David because we have only 5. No, David, wait a minute. I wanted to go to Nigel Lloyd, who also wanted to share something with the group. Nigel, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I stumbled upon a community of practice, a global community of practice, which is about scaling up, which is about moving from pilots to establishing, to moving to different sectors, to moving to different countries, to getting things to move more quickly. And the community of practice has subgroups related to fragile states, to education, to health, to agriculture, to global warming. And I think it's very interesting. I put a link to one of, they've just had an annual conference spread over something like 10 days with a session on each day. And I was able to attend most of them. And it was very interesting, very helpful. And I put one of the links up. I can put more up, but I suspect the simplest thing is to find the link from what I've put up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing, Nigel. We will all explore that indeed. I keep an eye on the clock. I think I'd love to see again the drawing of Chris Shipton, and I would like to hear your comments, Chris. Your interpretations of your drawing.
Hello, hi.
Yeah, hi.
Well, it's a lot to take in this week. I think the new format is working really well, but what my learning has very much that point about listening and explaining in these very difficult situations. I suppose, you know, from a sort of not expert view, you see TV cameras turning up and you think, why have they gone there? They're getting in the way. But yeah, I suppose the other view is, you know, they are explaining to the world what's happening, and it would see the point that's been made. You know, that helps other people understand it and hopefully dispel disinformation. So I think it's a fascinating point.
Fascinating for us to always see how you are illustrating the points that are shared on those briefings. Thank you so much, Chris. David, any reflection before we ask Michika to close us up for today? David?
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Please, let's just take on board, first of all, the incredible complexity of the situation in which Iman Ahmed found herself, and the need for incredible improvisation to try to get the best out of the human spirit in such an absolutely awful situation. And then Karen Palmer kind of builds on it by saying, hello, do you know, I've just done a piece of work looking at communication strategies in another really difficult crisis for humanity. And I looked at some of the things that Karen talks about in her paper. She introduces the importance of social listening. She stresses the need for radical transparency. I think she's saying, be really specific on who you're talking to so you touch people. And she says, take account that people need space and opportunity for collective grief. Gosh, those resonate with me. I think that if people are truthful to themselves when they talk to others, they close down opportunities for malevolent misinformation, because misinformation thrives on the notion that people with power are hiding something, that there is some kind of conspiracy, that this virus was made in a laboratory and released deliberately, that there are some people who are doing fine and there are others who are being injected with microchips, and so it goes on. And I'm really, really pleased that Karen is working on this, because it's one example of ways in which, in my view, we individually can contribute to a much more honest, systems-based approach to resolving the challenge in which we find ourselves. We accept that everybody matters. We give space for different perspectives to be present. We do not pretend that we know stuff that we don't know. We show that we are excited when people tell us what they're doing, and we are concerned when they tell us their fears. I know that it doesn't sound like very much. Some people might say, well, this is obvious, but it's not being done enough. I see Karen, she's shaking her head like that because it's not being done. And so this is what we would like to happen in these sessions, is that you take away nuggets and you think, how can I consider whether to incorporate that into my own practice? Or how can I contribute to the sum of knowledge and understanding that's coming out through what I do in my own practice? And then we become, as Nigel Lloyd said, a community of practice of living systems working. Thank you, Flo. Thank you, John, especially for just keeping us alive to the possibilities that are here with us and in front of us. And best wishes to Iman, who I think is logged off, but what a person.
Indeed, and what a summary. Thank you, David. Michika, can you close us up for today? And it's a special day for you.
I will spotlight Chris while I speak. Yeah, thank you everyone. And thank you so much, Chris. This is all amazing as always. And a special thank you to Iman and Serkan for speaking, and everybody else for sharing their experiences as well, especially during such a difficult time. So yesterday is my last day working with 4SD, and this platform of the Open Online Briefings has been especially special for me and has been the highlights of my time here. And this feeling of shared community and open discussion and raw emotion at times as well, as we saw today, is really special and vital in these times. Twee will be taking over from me, so I can, if Twee wants to write her email address in the chat, you can contact her if you need anything. And yeah, the next meeting will be on the 10th of March at the same time, at the same place. So thank you, everyone, and thank you for everything. Back to you, Flo.
Thank you, Michika. And you know that you will be missed, and you will remain mostly warmly welcome in all those briefings at any time, and this time to tell us what you are doing. But we are wishing you all the very best in your next endeavor. Thank you for all your contribution to these briefings and to much more than that. Thank you all for your engagement with us today. Special thoughts indeed to Iman and Serkan and all people affected by the terrible earthquakes that happened at the beginning of this week. Take care. Wishing you a very good weekend and months ahead. See you in a month from now. Bye-bye.